to the community, and then we threw a huge party and had a whole bunch of people turn out for that to give away the awards to the local businesses. One of the things that this has done is that the media has really picked up on it. We've had a lot of stories in the local newspaper, and it's an opportunity for business owners to talk about some of these issues and to get the message out to an even broader audience. I think what these campaigns can really do, there's maybe about 20% of the population that's already on board with this and pretty much, really looks for independent businesses. And there's probably about 20% of the population that only shops at Walmart and is really not going to be persuaded away from that. But there's this whole 60% in the middle. And those are people who sometimes shop at local stores and sometimes shop at chains. And that's where there's really an opportunity. Because what can happen is, say you've got someone who is a loyal customer of a local hardware store because they get great service there and they've been going to that store for a long time. But there are a lot of other things that they don't buy at a local business. Maybe they get books at Barnes & Noble and they order them online at Amazon. What happens is that person goes into a local hardware store and they start picking up some of this literature and they pick up the local business directory, and it starts to connect the dots, and they start to see, see some of these implications and the value. And they begin to think about the other choices that they make when they're shopping, and about maybe instead of going to Barnes & Noble all the time, maybe I ought to try that independent bookstore. Maybe I ought to look at a local grocer instead of the national chain. And it's shifting those kinds of choices that are being made by that group of people that I think can have a profound, make a profound difference for the future of independent businesses in our communities. Thank you so much for listening to me this morning. I appreciate you all coming out. Does anyone have any questions? Do we have time for questions?
Sure.
Yes, ma'am.
I have two questions. One is that a big box that develops a regional mall now argues that it is now the new community center. It has cafes, other walkable places for the community to get together, especially in small towns where you might not have a real center, a real little main street. That's number one. They've even approached the legislature because people wanted to have political rallies, and of course the private local malls have said this is private property, you can't do that. And other people are now arguing, well, this is the new community center, even though it's officially private property. Since so many people gather here, we might consider changing the law to allow things that formerly were not allowed. The other issue that I wanted to bring up is about these 60% of people, 40% of people. In our town, when you talk about the choices that people make, we have officials who will accuse us of elitism. So I was wondering if you could please address those two issues.
Well, as to the first question, some of the fallout that we have seen from this trend, national retailers, they want to sort of reinvent themselves every few years. And there's this thing, I talk about it in the book, I describe it as a development arms race that is going on out there, where developers and national retailers continue to abandon old locations and build bigger and bigger stores or new developments. First we have the strip malls, and then we have the big enclosed malls, and then we have the big box stores, and now Walmart's abandoning its old stores to build these even bigger super centers, often across the street or a mile down the road. The latest version of this is a kind of lifestyle center, which is really sort of it's like a faux Main Street. You walk down the middle of it, it kind of looks like a Main Street with little benches and lampposts. But you pan back, and there are these huge stores, and they're surrounded by a huge parking lot. It's not, it's a town center, but it's not actually the center of anything. It's kind of a Disneyland version of that. They've taken the very thing that they destroyed, and they're now selling it back to us in the form of a kind of fake Main Street. The fallout for this is that we now have a tremendous amount of abandoned retail. There are 200 big enclosed shopping malls in this country that are currently sitting dark, absolutely dark. We have thousands of old strip malls, the kind that were anchored by a grocery store usually, and then smaller businesses. that are sitting vacant. Walmart alone has over 200 empty stores across the country right this minute. And usually they just sort of go a little further out and build something else. These are not true community centers, and certainly not the lifestyle centers that are populated by the same chains that you see at malls. They don't have independent businesses. They don't have libraries. They don't have anything that is really part of a community center. And your second question was about elitism. And I think, people often talk about, well, Walmart benefits low-income people, they bring low prices. But the thing we have to do as a society is step back from that and look at the fact that what Walmart maybe has saved us at the cash register, they've taken that and more away from us in lost income. And no group in this country has been hurt more by that business model than low-income people. One, because the avenues to advancement in this country, generations of Americans, the way that you pulled yourself into the middle class was to start a small business or to get a good manufacturing, good production job. Those avenues have really been shut off by Walmart. People who are at the bottom end of the wage ladder are staying there and are stuck there much more than they were in earlier generations. The other thing is that as these companies have consolidated, their market power has enabled them to hold down retail wages. And so retail wages have actually not kept pace with the economy. And people in one of the lowest paying sectors have actually have lost ground as a result of the rise of these companies. So loss of opportunities and loss of income at the end of the day is having a far greater effect on low-income people than what these companies seem to bring in prices. And we really need to sort of have a conversation about real economic development and what's most beneficial to families and to family income. Is there another question? Yes, sir.
Here in New York State, we have a lot of our localities have the home rule. And when you get into planning for economic development, the zoning and the land use planning, without a coordinated state plan, you see a lot of localities doing different things. In my former role, I was a deputy commissioner at DOT, and you see a lot of big box companies come to localities without analyzing some of the factors that you're presenting today. And how do you get that message out to town boards, city councils?
Yeah. We've at the Institute for Local Self-Reliance, and incidentally, there's a handout that I brought you can grab on the way out if you want to look at our website or just get more information about what we do. We've developed a lot of resources and sort of fact sheets and things, particularly geared to town officials. And one of the things that we have done a lot of research on and pulled together studies on is the high cost, public services costs for many of these developments. And the communities get dollar signs in their eyes about having a new big retail development come in. It's going to generate all this property tax revenue and so forth. But there's a body of research out there that really documents that often what happens is you end up losing property tax revenue from existing commercial areas, and you incur these significant new costs. And two of the biggest ones are road maintenance. I mean, a typical Walmart generates 10,000 car trips a day. That's a lot of wear and tear on the roads, but the other one is police services. And part of that's because of the traffic. That's more people having to write tickets or deal with accidents and all that sort of thing. And part of it is because big box stores generate a large number of police calls for things like shoplifting and bad checks. Their policy is to always sort of involve the police and to sort of prosecute to the fullest extent of the law. And the result is that there are huge numbers of calls that get generated by these things. So I think talking about the real fiscal impacts is something that local officials, that certainly catches their attention. Talking about the job implications. But I think your larger point is a really good one. Local governments have got to start working together. There's got to be more regional coordination of planning, because so often what we're seeing is that companies are playing neighboring communities off one another, and they're saying, well, if you don't take what I want to do, or if you don't give me a tax break, I'm just going to go to the next town over. It's going to have the same impact. You're going to feel all the traffic and the loss of local businesses, but you're not, I'm going to do it in the next town over. And these guys are experts at playing local governments off against one another.